Well, Dr. Gary Chapman is an author, a speaker, a pastor for many years, but probably best known as a New York Times #1 best-selling author for the book, The 5 Love Languages. Always great privilege to speak with him. Dr. Chapman, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you.
Let's talk a bit about your family, and then we're going to get to some healthy family traits before this day is out. Let's talk about your family. Tell us about your wife and kids, how old they are. I assume they're all out of the home by now.
They are. Carolyn and I, on August the 12th, just celebrated our 62nd wedding anniversary.
Wow.
Congratulations. She says she doesn't know how that's possible because she's only 49. So both of our kids are grown. Shelly is our oldest, and she's, I guess, 58 now. And Derek, our son, is 54. She lives in Greenville, South Carolina, and is a medical doctor. She delivers high-risk babies and loves what she does. And our son and his wife live in Austin, Texas, where you live. And so they have a ministry to people they meet on the street and have a little Bible study, a little house church thing. And so that's what they do. Our daughter has our 2 grandchildren. And one of them, Davy Grace, has been out of college now for about 2 years, I think it is. She was a theater major, and her specialty is behind the scenes being a stage manager. She said, "Papa, I like telling people what to do." So
that's a good position.
And her son went to Wheaton College and graduated just this May and got married about 3 weeks ago to a girl he met at Wheaton College. They dated all 4 years, and she's from Portland, Oregon. And so we went out there for the wedding, and they are now living in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where we live. And he has enrolled in the graduate program at Wake Forest University, which is in our city, in accounting. So we're excited to know that he and his new wife are going to be in our city for a year. So we'll get to spend some time with them. So it's been good so far.
That's wonderful. Well, what a treat that will be, I'm sure, for you and the family. Well, 62 years of marriage. I'm going to test your memory here a little bit. We're going to go way back. And I'm going to reference some things probably people have heard you say before, but you talked about a rough start to your marriage, and obviously kids come along usually fairly early. Tell us about kind of that start to your marriage, and did you plan to have a family right away? How did that move forward?
Yeah, we got married, and 2 weeks later, we moved to Fort Worth, Texas, and I enrolled in seminary to study to be a pastor. No one told me that the average lifespan of the in-love experience was 2 years. I came down, and we dated 2 years before we got married. I came down pretty soon after the honeymoon. And the things my mother told me about her before we got married turned out to be true. And I'm sure what her mother told her about me also was true. And we found we had conflicts. We didn't know how to solve conflicts because when you're in love, you don't think you'll have any conflicts. And we ended up arguing because I knew I was right and she knew she was right. And we tried to convince each other. And sometimes we got loud. I remember one time we were in an argument. I don't remember the topic, but it was pouring down rain outside. In the middle of the argument, my wife walked out the front door and slammed the door and walked out into the rain. And I thought to myself, this is bad. When a woman walks in the rain, it's bad. So we struggled, because we didn't have any marriage preparation. I didn't read a book. I don't know if they had books back then on marriage, but I never saw one. And we spent 1 hour with the pastor who married us. And most of that was just about the wedding, So we didn't have any pre-marriage help. So we didn't know how to solve conflicts. And not only did I lose those euphoric feelings of being in love, but now I had negative feelings toward her. And I'm struggling because I'm thinking, man, I don't know how this is going to work. It seems like we disagree on everything, and we can't get together on anything. And here I am studying to be a pastor. And I'm thinking, man, I don't know how. I can't get up and preach hope to people and be miserable in my marriage, you know. So I don't know how many months this went on, but it was a pretty extended period. It was before we had children. So we didn't have children until 2 years later when we were back, you know, finished with the seminary program. But eventually, what I said to God was, I don't know what else to do. I've done everything I know to do, and this is not working. And I don't know what else to do. And as soon as I said that, there came to my mind a visual image of Jesus on his knees washing the feet of his disciples. And I heard God say to me, that's the problem in your marriage. You do not have the attitude of Christ toward your wife. Colin, it hit me like a ton of bricks, because I remember what Jesus said when he got up. He washed their feet, he stood up, and he said, you call me Lord and teacher, and you're right. In my kingdom, the leader serves. And I knew that was not my attitude. My attitude toward her was, if you'll just listen to me, we'll have a good marriage. And she wouldn't listen to me. But that day I got a different message. And I just confessed to God, you know, forgive me. With all my study in theology, I'm missing the whole point. And I said, please give me the attitude of Christ toward her. In retrospect, it's the greatest prayer I ever prayed about my marriage, because God changed my attitude. And 3 questions made this practical for me. When I was willing to ask these 3 questions, my marriage began to change. They're simple questions. The first question is, what can I do to help you? The second question, how can I make your life easier? And the third question, how can I be a better husband? And when I was willing to ask those questions, my wife was willing to give me answers. And so I began to do the things she was telling me. And then it didn't turn around overnight, but I'm thinking about 3 months later, she started asking me those 3 questions. And we've been moving this way now for a long time, you know, reaching out to her, serve her. She's reaching out to me to serve me. And we discovered, you know, what God intended marriage to be, a loving, supportive, caring relationship, you know. But, you know, I think the fact, Colin, that we went through that is God used that to give me empathy for people who are struggling in their marriage. Because I remember when I felt like, yeah, I don't know how it's going to work. I don't see how it can work. And in my office through the years, of course, I've had many people with that same attitude. So I can identify with that. So, you know, God uses even the hard places in our life eventually to not only for our benefit, but also for the benefit of others.
Talk for a moment. Thank you for sharing that. So important, I think, for people to hear, because I think, especially young marrieds, they always think it's going to be that euphoria that you're experiencing leading up to the wedding, maybe wedding day. You get together afterwards and things begin to change. And I think you've drawn a beautiful picture of what can happen, and more importantly, how to begin to resolve some of those issues. So thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about kids coming into the picture. Do you remember your first thoughts about being a dad? Were you ready? Were you prepared? What were you thinking when the first child came along?
I wouldn't say I was prepared. I was eager. I was excited. At that time, I was pastoring a church. My wife and I had moved back to North Carolina, and we were pastoring a church. And it was a Sunday morning when our baby was born. Shelly, our daughter, was born. And so I took her to the hospital, you know, and when I got there, the doctor checked her out, and he said, I think it's going to be a few hours. He said, if you'd like, since you're a pastor, you could go on back and preach and then come back. Now, in those days, husbands were not allowed to be in the room when the baby was born, okay? That was not allowed. So I just said, okay. So I went back and I preached that morning. And after I got through, I said to the people, I said, now I'm not going to be at the door to greet you this morning because Carolyn's in the hospital and we're going to have a baby soon. And I found later that the women weren't too happy with me that I left her at the hospital. But when I got back to the hospital, it was only about 30 minutes later or so, the doctor came in and said, well, you got a baby daughter. I said, oh, wonderful. And so they took me back, you know, and let me see Carolyn and the baby. So, and what Carolyn had said before we got married, she said, I want to have 5 boys, because she came from a large family. She had 5 brothers and 2 sisters. And you know, I was in love, and I said, it's before we got married. And I said, well, whatever you want to do, honey, that's fine with me. Well, So I walked in there and found out we had a daughter. We never knew in those days until the
Right.
baby was born.
Right.
And so I walked in, and she was still under some, anesthesia, and she said, "It's a little girl, but I couldn't help it." And the doctor said to her, "Don't you worry about it. She'll have him wrapped around her little finger." And he was right about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, and our daughter really was easy to raise. In fact, I wondered, she slept a lot, and then when she got older, she was very compliant. She'd followed the guidelines and all. And I wondered in those years, why do people have so many problems with parenting? This is not all that hard. And 4 years later, we had a son.
Then came Derek.
Then came Derek, and he didn't sleep much at all. His idea was, you're wasting time to sleep. And he was all over the map. I mean, he was really, really hard. And I realized, now I see why people have struggle in raising children. It's amazing. I wrote a book some time ago called Things I Wish I'd Known Before We Became Parents. And one of those things is, I wish I'd known that no two children are alike, because I had assumed that since she was so easy and compliant and all, he would be the same. Well, no, totally different. Two children, same parents, totally different.
Very different.
Yeah.
Let's talk for a moment about those years of raising the children. You said that Shelley was pretty compliant. Derek was a little different, boy and a girl. Any just highlights, things that you remember, just things that stood out about their youth, maybe before the college years, things that really impacted you as a dad that you just look back on with fond memories about the family or about either of the kids?
Well, a lot of fond memories with Shelley. Her love language, I didn't know anything about love languages, but her love language was quality time. And 2 or 3 nights a week after dinner, she would say, as she got older, she'd say, "Dad, can we take a walk after dinner?" She just loved my being with her. And of course, I took both of the kids out once a month. I'd take them out for breakfast individually and just spend time with them, and they both enjoyed that. And I enjoyed that. But Shelley, when she was 8 years old, she said, "When I get big, I'm going to be a doctor." And she'd said that to Carolyn, and Carolyn said to her, "Well, honey, if that's what God wants, that'll be fine." So in high school, she took 3 years of chemistry and 4 years of Latin, getting ready to be a doctor. She never wavered. She was just focused. And Derek always said about her, he said, "Shelley's going to miss a lot in life. She's just too focused." He was all over the place. In high school, he had a little rock band. He played the guitar, and he was the lead singer in this little rock band, and they played at several places, And I'd go hear him, I wasn't in the rock bands, but I'd go hear him. And but the one memory that I have of Derek, I sometimes say it was the saddest night of my life and the happiest night of my life, and it all happened the same night. He and I got into an argument. We were in his room. I don't remember the topic, but we got loud with each other. We were yelling and screaming at each other, and I said hateful things, and he said hateful things. And in the middle of that argument, he walked out of his room and across the living room and out the front door and slammed the door. And he was probably 14 or 15. And when the door slammed, I woke up and I thought, "Oh God, what have I done?" Yelling at the son I love. And I sat down on the couch and just started weeping. And Carolyn came in and tried to console me. She said, "Honey, he started that. He's got to learn how to respect you. I don't know what we're going to do with him." And she tried to console me, but it's hard to console a sinner. I knew I was wrong. So I just got on my knees and poured my heart out to God and told God, I thought I was further along than this, God. And I just asked God to forgive me, for the way I talked to my son. I have a deep appreciation for the cross of Christ, because God forgives us. I don't care what we've done if we confess. Well, I don't know how long it was before he came back in the house, but when he did, I was still on the couch. And I said, "Derek, could you come in here a minute, son?" And he sat down on the gold chair, and I just apologized to him and told him how sad I was for the way I talked to him. I said, "No father should ever talk to a son the way I talked to you." And I said some hateful things. I said, I lost my temper and I said some hateful things. And that's not the way I feel about you. I love you very much. I just poured my heart out to him and asked him if he could please forgive me. And he said to me, Dad, that was not your fault. I started that. And when I was walking up the road, I asked God to forgive me for the way I talked to you. And I'll forgive you if you'll forgive me. We hugged each other and we cried, and we hugged each other and we cried. And finally, when we got through crying, I said, Derek, why don't we try to learn how to handle our anger without yelling at each other? Let's try to learn how to talk our way through anger. So what if we try this? The next time you're angry with me, you just say, Dad, I'm angry. Can we talk? And I'll just sit down and listen to you. And if I'm angry with you, I'll say, Derek, I'm angry. Can we talk? And we'll just talk our way through anger rather than yelling our way through anger. And Colin, that was the beginning point. That was the beginning point in which I learned how to handle anger, and he learned how to handle anger. And that's why, and I say this is one of the saddest nights of my life because of just my poor behavior, but one of the happiest nights because he demonstrated to me he knew how to apologize.
Yeah.
And I knew someday he'd be married. He'd need to learn how to apologize to his wife.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that was a sad night, but also a happy night for me and a good memory. And then he and I have many, many memories. Every summer, I would take him somewhere. He and I'd go somewhere for 2 days and just spend 2 days together. We went all over the Blue Ridge Parkway in North Carolina, 2 days at a time every year. And as he got older, I'd ask him where he wanted to go. And, we went to New York and we just went all over everywhere. And we both have memories of all those things, So, yeah, a lot of happy moments, along with a lot of struggles, particularly with Derek.
Yeah. What a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that. One thing I failed to ask, but I want to check out because, most of the people who engage with this podcast are believers. Obviously, you were a pastor when the kids came. Did you all talk specifically about things you plan to do to train up your children, so to speak? Or was it more just, we're going to live our lives like we do? Christ is part of our lives, and we're going to allow these kids to soak up that lifestyle of living for Christ. Any thoughts or comments about that?
Yeah, we were pretty organized in our format in our family. Carolyn agreed that she would get up every morning and cook a hot breakfast. Now that was a Mother Teresa act because she's not a morning person. And for all those years until the last one went off to college, she cooked a hot breakfast. And after that, she said, "Oh, honey, it's over. I promised God I'd do this as long as the kids were here."
Get your bowl of cereal.
Yeah. So every morning at the table, she wasn't saying much. She was hardly awake, But I would just read a brief, just a verse in the Bible, and just say a few words to the kids about it, and they would ask questions if they wanted to, and we'd have a brief prayer together. That was breakfast. Hmm. And then when they got ready to go to school, got old enough to go to school, I would drive them to school. And we put both of them in Christian schools for the first 8 years. They were in a Christian school. And then every evening after dinner was our time not only to eat, but our time to talk. And we would talk about what happened today. Each family member would tell 2 or 3 things or anything that happened in their life today, and how they felt about it, how they responded to it. And then we'd talk about all kinds of topics, just whatever anybody wanted to talk about. Well, we would sit there sometimes for 30, depending on their age, 30 minutes earlier, and later on it was an hour, just talking after dinner. And then when it became after school, they would do their homework first before they could play and all that. And after dinner or before dinner sometimes, because I came home at 3 o'clock every day when they were in school. A pastor can control his schedule somewhat unless there's a crisis. I'd come home and I'd be there. I'd bring them home from school and I'd be there with them. So they'd do their homework, and then we would either go outside and play, and after dinner sometimes we would play indoor games, board games together. But then every night we would have a family devotional time. And when they were little, we were reading out of a Bible story book. As they got older, we were reading out of portions of the Bible, and we were discussing it and asking questions of each other about it. And then Carolyn and I, one of us would go to each child's bed every night. We didn't do the same child every night, but I'd go to one bed, his bed or her bed, and we'd get on our knees beside the bed, and we would pray with the children, with the child. And as they got older, then they started praying. And Shelley says that's where I learned to pray. And we did that every night. So our lives are pretty structured. Of course, now I know I didn't really know at that time that kids really do much better in a structured lifestyle than they do doing whatever they want to do whenever they want to do it. So yeah, that was pretty much the pattern of our family.
Well, in the time we have remaining in our podcast today, obviously people know you best for the 5 love languages. And I know that came from years of counseling and learning and pastoring. And boy, what a blessing that has been to so many. You see it even in secular culture today, which I'm sure just amazes you. You'll hear it mentioned on a television program or something like that, which I always like, hey, that's Dr. Chapman, the love languages, when I'm not expecting it. But boy, what a blessing that has been to so many, millions and millions of copies of that sold. But you've also spent some time on some very specific efforts in reaching the family. You've already mentioned apology today. I know that you have a book that talks about the importance of apologies and how people hear apologies different, relationships in the workplace, how that is engaged. I want to talk about, in these final moments, your book, 5 Traits of a Healthy Family. And if we could maybe touch on those in the coming moments, I'd just like to work through what you have learned from your experience and your counseling and all of these pieces of the puzzle that you've been working on for so long, those 5 traits of a healthy family. Because I think whether you're a dad or a mom listening today, you're going to pick something up that will be helpful, whether you've just had kids or you've had kids a long time. These healthy traits will help you in the years to come. Can we start with number 1?
Yeah. I wrote this book, Colin, because so many people in today's world grew up in a dysfunctional family, and they really don't have a clear picture of what a healthy family would even look like. And so I'm trying to give a clear picture of 5 traits of a healthy family. The first one we've already really talked about in my own experience, and that is there will be an attitude of service in a healthy family. That is, the husband will have an attitude of serving the wife. She'll have an attitude of serving him. They will serve the children. They'll teach the children how to serve each other and later serve the family. And then they'll take it outside the family. And their family will be a family that serves in the community. At whatever age level, they start teaching the children how to go out and serve. And they go with them and teach them that. So that's the first sign. I put it number 1 because if you don't have an attitude of service, probably won't do much of the rest of these. It takes an attitude of service. And then secondly, there will be intimacy between the husband and wife in a healthy family. Now, sometimes people hear the word intimacy and they think only about the sexual part of marriage, but it's far more than that. It's intellectual intimacy. In a healthy family, husbands and wives will share their ideas, their concepts, their dreams, and all of that in a healthy way. They'll have emotional intimacy. They'll seek to meet each other's emotional needs, and that's where the love languages can be a real help in helping them meet that deep need to feel love. They'll learn each other's language. They'll choose to speak that language because they have an attitude of service. And so, and then there's social intimacy. They'll do things together outside the home. In many ways, it may be going to a symphony together. It may be going to a ball game together. It may be just going somewhere to see something in your neighborhood with other people. So there's social intimacy. And when they're apart, they're sharing with each other that night the kind of things that they did during the day. And then there's spiritual intimacy. They'll share their spiritual journey with each other. And I don't mean, Colin, they preach to each other. They don't say, I read this morning in the Bible, and you really need to hear this. No, I don't mean that. No. I mean, you're sharing things like, honey, I want to share something I read this morning that really spoke to my heart. And then you share it with them, So, and of course, going to church together is a spiritual thing that you do together as well. And then there's physical intimacy. Yes, the whole sexual part of the marriage. So in a healthy family, there'll be intimacy between the husband and wife. And then the parents will teach and train the children. The parents will give guidance. The parents will see themselves as the authority in the home, just as God is the authority over us. And God gave us rules. God said, don't do this. Don't do these things. Do these things. Every rule God ever gave us came out of his love for us. So as parents, we're the authority. We're the ones that make the rules. 3-year-olds don't make the rules. We make the rules. We're older. We're wiser. And so there are things that we don't do. There are things that we do. So parents teach and train. I use those two words because I think they have to go together. Teaching is using words to communicate concepts and ideas and rules to children. Actions put it into practice. So, the mother calls the child for dinner. The child's playing next door. She goes to the door and says, Johnny, dinner. And little Johnny just keeps playing. And then she does the same thing again. She does it 3 times. He doesn't come home. The 4th time she says, Johnny, get home. And little Johnny comes home. Why? Because he learned that if he doesn't come home when mama says, get home, she'll come down there and take him by the hand and walk him home. And he does not want mama in the neighborhood. So he comes home. Now I say to the mother, if you want to call 4 times for your kids to come home, that's fine with me. But if you'd rather they come on the first one, you take the action that you used to put on number 4 and put it on number 1. So actions and words go together. And then
Dr. Chapman,
Yeah.
can I jump in real quick on this? And without getting political, I'd just love to hear your thoughts. We are in a culture today where school districts are teaching and training our kids, and politicians are talking about what to train and teach our kids. This is such a key piece, just maybe a further word of encouragement to parents today who are feeling like, what power do I have? What should I be doing? How far should I go? Because I'm, so many people that want it, my kids, so many outside influences, add social media and all that to it. And here they are trying to do this thing that you've said, teach and train. I would assume that's especially important as they're young.
Absolutely. Because in the early years, they're not in school. So a lot of this is 1, 2, 3, 4 years old. We're the only ones that are impacting them. And again, teaching them, these are things we don't do. These are things we do. Those guidelines are important. Teaching a child to obey. And so I think, it's extremely important. And it is more difficult today than ever because of all the things that are on the outside. And so I just say to the parents, first of all, when it comes to education, try to find the best possible alternative. Now, I know that not everyone can afford to put their children in private Christian schools. I understand that. But even public schools, some are much, much better than others. And so make the best effort to find the best educational place for your child. And then interface with the child on a rather regular basis on what they're learning at school so that you can help them process what they're learning. And if it's off track, you can have input into that. So this is extremely important for children.
Thank you. We can pick up number 4.
Yeah, number 4, in a healthy family, husbands will be loving leaders. Now, Colin, a lot of resistance to this idea today of a husband being a leader in the home. And I think part of it is because we've misinterpreted what the Bible says. The scripture says the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. And I've heard people say, well, what that really means is, like in our culture, the husband is the president and she's the vice president. He has the final word. Or you say, well, he's the general and he'll tell her what to do. No. The biblical model is Jesus. What did the head of the church do? He died for the church. So the husband is a loving leader. He's not there to boss anybody around. He's there to take initiative in the kind of things we've already talked about, in building intimacy in the relationship with his wife, and in being a servant in the home. So he is a loving leader. And most wives will appreciate a man who will take initiative to do the kind of things that we're discussing in this book. And he can't do it all, and he can't make anybody do anything. He's not there to make anybody. He's there to see his wife as a partner but he takes the leadership in bringing up things and ideas that need to be discussed with her and the family. So a leader. And then the last one is, in a healthy family, children will obey and honor their parents. Clearly taught in the scriptures. If children don't learn to obey their parents, they will not, as adults, know how to obey those who are in authority. And that's a huge problem in our culture today, as you well know.
Yeah.
I've heard public school teachers say to me, Gary, the biggest problem I have in my classroom is just trying to keep order and discipline so I can teach, because they have no respect for the teacher as an authority. If they don't learn it at home, there's no other place to learn it. So that's why, again, when we make a rule, we need to also have a consequence. And we need to tell the child what the consequence will be. For every rule we have, there should be a consequence if we break the rule. That's what happens to us. God disciplines his children when they do wrong because he loves us. So, let's say you have a rule that we don't throw the ball inside the house. We throw it outside, but not in the house. And if you do throw the ball in the house, we'll have to put the ball in the trunk of the car for 2 days, and you won't get to play with it. And if you broke something, we'll have to pay for it out of your allowance. Okay, now you know the rule, they know the rule, you know the consequences, they know the consequences. You're less likely now to overreact, and say, "No, I told you not to throw the ball in the house. You know better than that." No, just apply the consequence. And if you can wrap it in love, so much the better. Just say, "Honey, you know I love you so much, and I'm proud of you. You normally keep the rules, but you broke this one, and you threw the ball in the house, right?" And they're crying now. And you say, "Now, you know what has to happen, right?" They're nodding their head. So let's go put it in the trunk of the car. And then you put it in the trunk and you say, "But look, honey, I love you so much and I'm so proud of you." Give them a big hug. You apply the consequences, but you do it in love, an attitude of love. And that child realizes this is fair. This is right. I have to suffer the consequences. So getting that down, teaching children to obey, they will then come to honor you. If they don't learn to obey you, they may never come to honor you.
So important. And again, you can find these in the 5 traits of a healthy family. We'll link you to this in today's podcast notes so you can look for it there. 5 traits of a healthy family. Dr. Chapman, in the moment we have left, one final question for a dad starting out in the fathering process today, maybe expecting a baby or has a newborn or a toddler and hasn't quite started the process of doing the parenting thing fully yet. Maybe just a word of encouragement for the days and weeks and years ahead as they begin this process of parenting.
First thing I would say is pray for wisdom every day. Listen, most of us didn't have a lot of preparation for parenting. That's why I wrote that book, Things I Wish I'd Known Before We Became Parents. So you read a book like that, Things I Wish I'd Known Before We Became Parents. But pray for wisdom, that God will give you the wisdom you need, because every child is going to be different, and you have to treat them differently. But God will give wisdom. The Bible says if we ask for wisdom, he'll give us wisdom. And then work on your own relationship with God, and particularly in developing this attitude of service to your wife and to your children. And it's really an attitude of love. Love is an attitude of I'm here to serve you. I'm here to do everything I can to help you become the person you believe God wants you to become. I'm here to help my children become what God has for them. So ask God to change your heart and give you an attitude of service. And see, the opposite of that is selfishness. I'm in this marriage for you to make me happy. You're not making me happy, so I'm out of here. 2 selfish people will never have a good marriage and never have a healthy family. So ask God to give you an attitude of service and to give you wisdom. Those would be my 2 suggestions.
Dr. Gary Chapman, author, speaker, pastor, counselor, author of the book, The 5 Love Languages, and another one we'll link you to, 5 Traits of a Healthy Family. I think I'll stick on that link as well for things I wish I had learned before. What's the title again? Things I wish I'd learned before I started parenting?
Things I wish I'd known before we became parents. Yeah.
All right. We'll link to all 3 of those for sure. And you'll get a good mix of things in today's podcast notes. Dr. Chapman, it is always a pleasure and a thrill to get to talk to you. I appreciate you, my friend. You have been such an inspiration to me for many years, and the work that I did at Moody for many years and all the people there. And I know, again, for millions of people around the world, your work has inspired them and impacted them. Thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Colin. And thanks for what you're doing. You know, you finished your work at Moody. Now you're doing a podcast for people. As long as we got energy, let's keep on taking whatever we've learned and help other people. So thanks for what you're doing.